Hello, Nick.
Hey, Matt, good to see you.
Good to see you as well. And hello to everyone out there listening to this Vogue Academy talk. Today, we're going to talk about elite context and some of the interesting dynamics that can happen to us when we're in those types of contexts. And we are going to kick this discussion off with a quote. This was in the Harvard Crimson, I assume the student newspaper up at Harvard. Nick, can you just, before I read this little quote, what was the context or the title of the article?
My understanding is that the Harvard University faculty staff did an analysis, some sort of report on grade inflation at Harvard. And this was either a quote in the report or a response in the paper to the report. I'm not entirely sure.
And this is a student quote, obviously, as you'll.
That's my understanding, yes.
Right. And it's pretty obvious.
Undergraduate student.
Yeah. So I will go ahead and read this. So the quote, the pullout is this. The whole entire day I was crying. I skipped classes on Monday and I was just sobbing in bed because I felt like I tried so hard in my classes and my grades aren't even the best. It just felt soul crushing. What makes Harvard student a Harvard student is their engagement in extracurriculars. Now we have to throw that all away and pursue just academics. I believe that attacks the very notion of what Harvard is. Let me just read that last quote again. What makes a Harvard student is their engagement in extracurriculars. Now we have to throw that all away and pursue just academics. I believe that attacks the very notion of what Harvard is. So that's really an interesting claim that the student really wants to that the extracurriculars are what make a Harvard student, not the academics. And the fact that the student is feeling like they have to shift their focus and attention and energy away from extracurriculars back to academics is really interesting. So Nick, yeah, I'd love to hear your take on this and kind of help us understand what's going on here. That I mean, obviously we don't have to psychoanalyze the student, but there's this dynamic that's going on in this context and this student is obviously not alone. There's a lot of students struggling with this.
That's right. Yeah, so to her credit, she was courageous enough to articulate this and put it out there. I don't know that her name was attached to it. And I do want to say, first of all, I have compassion to her experience and her suffering. And I think it arises from so there's two angles. One is a misunderstanding of the context in which she's in. Her misunderstanding is understandable, given how people get to places like Harvard and Princeton and other places. And, there is apparently a long-standing saying about Harvard, which is the hardest thing about Harvard is getting into Harvard. Whether that's true or not, I've heard that for a long time. And so hardest, I think, intellectually, maybe, is getting, or hardest. So that's kind of saying something that I think is in line with what this student is saying. So that's one angle, is there's this understanding of what incoming students coming from K-12 contexts imagine universities to be about and what they're for. In this case, and especially elite ones like Harvard, they're highly selective, right? They're selecting students not only on their academics, but these extracurriculars. We know that to be the case. It's not surprising then that she's made these, derived these conclusions. I think they're mistaken. And then another point is so that she has a misunderstanding of the context and culture and community she's in, and that leads to her distress. This mismatch and understanding of the context, the culture, the values, what the true very notion of what Harvard is, what's valued, what's prioritized, what's emphasized. And again, to her credit, she's able to surface and name this. I've heard things not quite so direct and clear over the years at Berkeley and Princeton. I don't know if, I think you probably have too, Matt, something like this.
Yeah, I mean, again, I've been out for a good almost 7 years now, so I think it's become more acute.
I think you're right. Yeah. So that's one. Oh, sorry. So one angle is kind of this mismatch in students' understanding of the community and culture, and often not always, the administration and faculty. Then there's another angle that particularly lends itself to an analysis from the perspective of self-worth theory of achievement motivation. So what happened? So it's just to be clear. So I sometimes say self-worth theory of motivation or self-worth theory. Mostly I'm thinking about self-worth theory of achievement motivation. So there's a subfield in motivation that focuses in on specifically on achievement. Sometimes I think it's a term I kind of made up, or maybe I read it, but I might call achievement context. In a context in what we're being evaluated and we're striving for achievement, there's some dynamics, motivational and other dynamics that arise that are often counterintuitive. And one of which is procrastination. And I think this, with some analysis, we can see that it kind of demonstrates the utility or usefulness of a self-worth theory of achievement motivation, and reveals some things about these achievement contexts that people don't always notice. If that makes sense. So I thought we could kind of use this, unpack it, analyze it a bit. And so I'm going to be a little clinical and analytical. Again, I don't want to sound uncaring toward the student, right? I'm not, that's not the case. I think she's got good reason to be mistaken.
Right. But I think it's important to, if we come across as unfeeling, it's to try to understand how someone could even make that statement.
That's right.
It's in a way, it's kind of a, we take that as a given, and then we're trying to understand what makes that possible. It's
That's right.
philosophy, it's a transcendental argument, like,
Precisely.
yeah, so that's what we're doing is, and I think that's informative for everyone who's in these types of achievement contexts, be
That's
it
right.
in an elite college or in the workplace. There are these
Sports.
cues, sports, you are, it seems so obvious that from a distance that you should be focused on this, but once you get into the context, you are picking up clues that might be in contradistinction from those that you thought you should have initially. So anyway, yeah, I think it's like full steam ahead.
Great. Yeah. And just to add on one little bit, I coaching student, if I was working with this coaching student, I would start with exactly what I'm saying now,
Right.
because if you have a misunderstanding of this, how would an 18-year-old really have a deep understanding of research universities and how they work? It's not surprising that they would, but it's important that they have an accurate understanding so that they can interpret that and adapt and adjust, and in psychological terms, that they wouldn't misattribute their explanations and for themselves and the causal explanation. So self-worth theory helps students, in my view, the sociological analysis of the university helps students reinterpret their experiences and say, oh, it's not about me, it's about my high school doesn't prepare me for this. And we have different values and it's a different culture. And this is this rarefied, elite, rare research university culture of a Ivy League institution or an elite liberal arts college. Or what does it take to be a professional athlete coming out of college? That these are different communities, cultures, values, expectations, demands. And if you hold on to the last one and you don't take a step up and go to the next level, then you're going to be out of sync. But how do you know? If you're brand new to that context, you have to trust somebody who's been there a while, who can be an informant and a guide. And so that's how I would view this. So anyway, enough qualifications. And
Here we go.
Okay. So first off, the students, I'm going to start with the end of this first paragraph. I guess people can't see it. So she says, it felt soul crushing. So we might ask, why would so she says, I didn't get the best grade. It's soul crushing. So we might start by saying, like you said, what circumstances and contributors would lead someone to say, I didn't get the best grade. That is soul crushing. My soul is crushed. And we'll give some latitude for some hyperbole, but she was crying all day. So it was pretty big. It's a big deal. Right. Why would not having the best grade be crushing to your soul? How does one get to such a position? And I think, if you think about how students get to Harvard, they have a long string of successes. My colleague who used to work at Harvard said Harvard students are failure deprived, which I thought was a brilliant statement, right?
Right.
They haven't encountered these setbacks, failures enough to be able to interpret them, tolerate them, assimilate them, process them. A lot of times they have a string, largely, and that's not everybody, certainly, but that was her observation. She was in that context. So one is, number one, that This is a new experience, unfamiliar experience. Two, it's soul crushing because it's so important to her, her sense of self, her soul, right? Her
Right.
sense of self for her is on the line with not getting the best grade. That's not uncommon, right? People, if I don't get the best grade, if I don't perform the best, then I failed. Because they're the valedictorians. They set the curve. They have been the best again and again and again, which also means, and this is a little less flattering, means they're better than other people.
Yeah, and I think that's really, I mean, just to pause there, I think that's really important because they are measuring themselves by not just that grade, but what that grade means in terms of their peers.
That's right.
In their high school, yeah, I was the top. I was
Mhm.
top dog. So in a way, in my view, I had more worth in a way, or my,
That's right.
I hate to put it that way, but it's like,
Affirmation, adulation,
yeah,
people were more. No, I think worth is perfectly because the demonstration, the materialization of that sense of worth is you went to a university that puts more money into you.
right. And I just want to say, I think we're always, qualifying,
Mhm.
making sure we're kind of uh, being careful here, but I think that's very natural and very
Yes,
common. And so it's not like we're
absolutely.
we're singling out this student. I mean, I did that
Yeah.
as well. And I'm someone, who is driven by recognition and achievement. And so I was always like, yeah, I'm better than everyone else because I could do this better and that better. And so
Mhm.
I stand accused as well in that
Mhm.
sense of wanting to my self-worth was based in part on being better or, either pushing myself above others or pushing them down below me.
Mhm.
So,
Right, those are the internal mental processes, emotional processes that are going on in relation to yourself, to maintaining your sense of self relative to you and then relative to others.
yep,
And so, yeah, there's no negative judgment here. These are very common, especially for teenagers. Our society reinforces these processes.
yep,
Yeah, it's not to cast aspersions on this particular individuals. Again, it's to laud her for actually being
yep,
vulnerable to reveal them.
yep,
Um, and that these are powerful human drives and needs. And then where that intersects these human qualities, these repeated experiences of success and attainment and recognition and validation encounter then an environment. That's how you get to Harvard in many cases, or Princeton or Stanford or what have you. But the environment is often filled with people with the same profile.
right,
And then the faculty, there's a few other things that are going on. Like faculty and the courses don't often reward the same sorts of things, right? And we see this in sports too. The best college players are often not the best pros. And the best pros are often drawn from people who you'd like, how did they get drafted? They had 10 points and 2 rebounds a game. Yeah, but they're super tall or they have some skill set or there's something that just it maps onto that game differently. So there's different qualities that are affirmed, rewarded, and valued in the university that are not valued in high school, namely compliance. Doing what's expected. In college, often you have too many things. You can't do everything that's expected. So you have to be a creative problem solver. You have
right,
to be willing to divert from the path. You have to be willing to say, I'm not going to do everything my teacher tells me to do, because if I did, I would actually never get any sleep. Because often these places they over assign. And so those are some ethical dilemmas. There's self-concept. I'm a good
yeah,
student. There's all the way down. There are these layers that are operating in these new environments for students that put the stress on them and raise questions and doubts. But to come back to this main point, so and if coming back, what motivates students to work so hard to get into places, these elite environments? Well, one of the things is that you identified with that. So the self-worth is a powerful drive, super powerful. If you think your sense of self, if you believe, I should say, your sense of worth as a human being is attached to your grade in that AP physics class, boy, you're going to push hard. Is that healthy? Is it going to help you learn the most? Not necessarily, but you're going to push hard. So it's a powerful motivator. And then when it's reinforced, right, you've really connected your identity to that. Interestingly, in this case, you may have also connected your identity to extracurriculars. I'm the kid who does all these other extra things too, right? And now when I get to Harvard, I can't seemingly do those. And that that's not just a bad grade. That's a threat to my self-concept. I'm not who I thought I was. This environment, right, is telling me something that puts in question my sense of self, who I thought I was, who other people think I am, who other people told me I am. You're the best student we've ever had in 10 years in the math class department here at blah, blah, blah high school. Right. And now you're struggling.
Right.
You got 10, I've seen this, maybe you have too. You had 10 AP fives and a 4.0 and 780 and an 800, and you're struggling at Princeton. What? You are knocked off your center.
Right.
How is this possible? What's going on? Who are these people? You're resentful. Why are they telling me this? It's unfair. It's not right. Those are reasonable responses.
Yeah, because it's like because you've done so well to learn the game, the high school game, and succeeded, and now the rules have changed, and no one told you, and so it's unfair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's some things there's some evidence. The exam problems didn't look anything like the homework. They're just trying to trick me.
Right.
Understandable. Not if it's accurate. Oh, this is I heard this last week. I was having a conversation with some Princeton students. Well, the professors really like having these weed out classes. And I said, never heard a professor say that. They're not saying classes don't weed people out. But that's not why. They're not trying to do that. Right? They're not, my experience is they're not putting quotas on grades to keep people out. They're maintaining high standards because they believe it's important to know your chemistry and your physics. Those are very different motivations, very different reasons, and actually very different solutions. Because if there's quotas that limit your attainment, then you have to be better than everybody else. If what's limiting your attainment, your grades, like there's a grade deflation, not artificially by a quota, but because by very high standards, then the solution isn't to be better than somebody else necessarily. It's to meet the standards by different methods. So then you might work with people to get to the standard versus the first scenario, you would not work with them because you think you're in competition with them.
Right.
Very different. And that's just a general orientation to what are your peers relative to you? Are they competitors or allies?
Right. Before we move on, I thought you had a line that I thought was really important, is the distinction between students coming to these conclusions and these ways of thinking is understandable.
Yeah.
But it's inaccurate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to emphasize that point. That is such a good point, because it's easy to say, if I understand you, then I'm somehow justifying your position. I'm saying, when we're saying we understand, that's very, even to say it's even understandable, natural, because no one's like kind of you step from one context to another, and no one kind of said, hey, this is a different context with different rules or different ways of going about things and achieving. And so in that vortex, it's easy to kind of pick up, ways students have resolved or concluded conclusions that are inaccurate. So anyway.
Yeah, I might add a third word: understandable, inaccurate, but not inevitable. Sure. You can unlearn that. And many Princeton students do, and Berkeley students, they come to a new understanding. Some don't. And I think, so there's reasons why a person who's had a long string of success might hold on more tightly. They'd be less likely to unlearn what they learned.
Right.
And so I think in elite environments and context, we should recognize that. We should say, we're selecting you. We can predict your profile. I can imagine that, and I do, we said that. You've said that in our workshops. I can imagine why you won't listen to me. Well, one of the reasons I wouldn't listen to me is because you have a long string of successes without me. Why would you listen to me? Right.
Right.
There's reasons to listen to me, but I could imagine you having that line of thought, or not even being aware. You didn't listen to a bunch of other people before, and you still got to where you are. My daughter says this very well. Poppy, you say, college is going to be different. But when I was in elementary school, they said middle school is going to be different. It kind of wasn't. When I was in middle school, they said high school is going to be different. It kind of wasn't. When I was in high school, they said college would be different. what have I learned? I've learned not to listen to you.
Right.
I mean, I think that's fair.
Right.
Again, I think it's wrong, at least in the case of Princeton. I can't speak for every other college, but anyway, so what I think is we can talk some more about how achievement context in particular evokes some counterintuitive responses, some maladaptive patterns, some self-defeating approaches.
And I would just like, and within that, there's this bitterness,
Yeah, resentment.
the resentment and bitterness that I think that can really eat at your soul, which
Yeah,
is tragic.
right.
There's a whole bunch of the maladaptions can lead a lot of to deleterious effects, but I feel like bitterness and resentment really are um, at the top of the list of what can really damage you um, and hurt you. So anyway,
Yeah. Have you ever heard that saying, resentment is drinking poison and hoping the other person dies?
oh really? Oh gosh,
Yeah, because
yeah, that's
it's so poisonous to oneself. You think
right.
you're so angry. And
Yeah,
I know that resentment is sort of the antithesis of motivation. If you're resentful, man, it's hard to muster motivation.
yep, yep.
If you think that person doesn't care, you're resentful about that. That's one of the reasons when I'm working with students is really to depersonalize much of what
Mm,
faculty do. It's not, they're like, my professor doesn't care about my learning, or they're trying to trick me. It's not it's not that every professor is virtuous and caring and everything, but it's almost never motivated by personal animosity. It's about practices of the university and what we do there that students then personalize.
yes, that's a
Again,
good way to put it.
understandably, but
Right.
not, I know the faculty, I know
Yeah.
these people. I work with them on the design of their courses. I have lunch with them. I know them. They are
Yeah.
about the same as the students.
So what you were making a good point. With the student, this Harvard student, there's this want to emphasize to focus on the extracurriculars,
Yeah.
and she's feeling like she's being pulled uh, away from those. So, and you before we started recording, you were talking about this. I thought it was a really good point. I just want to make sure we cover it in terms
Yeah.
of why, like, in terms of distinction, why even have the emphasis on extracurriculars in the first place?
Right. So there's her emphasis and then her attribution or of that emphasis. She projects that onto the institution, right? She says
Hmm.
Harvard is that is its essence. I assume when people were whoever's listening, they heard that they thought Harvard at the very notion of what Harvard is promoting extracurricular. I would think most people in the world outside of Harvard would say, I don't think so. I would think I'm pretty sure most faculty would say definitely not. Um, Many administrators, perhaps most, if not all, virtually all, would say no. But we can say, where did she get that belief? And if you have that belief, does it contribute to the consequence we observed, which is a day of despair? I
Hmm.
think you can draw a direct line from that belief to this. And again, to go back to your point, we can also understand why a student would come to this, again, mistaken belief. Why? Well, there's a lot of good grades being given out. Many students get 4.0s or 4.9s, and I've seen it on my Facebook feed. There's these pitches about getting into elite. Um, you won't get into Harvard and elite Ivies based on your grades. It has to be extracurriculars and your letter and all this other stuff. Well, whoever's selling that believes that's the case. They're probably to some extent right. They've concluded that these are adult people selling this product. They think it's true. And they also think other people think it's true. That's why they're appealing to them. So it's not surprising the student thinks that. Here's the thing I would start with. Are the people recruiting and admitting you the same people that are teaching your chemistry class or whatever it is that you found soul crushing? No, they are not. Admissions and faculty are far apart. Those are not the same people. So, so whatever message you got, and also from your peer culture about what IVs are, because students get most of their information from Instagram and TikTok and from
Hmm.
other recent students who don't really understand the institution very well either. So that's one dynamic. So she has that, but there's another one, and this is what we discussed. And I've asked Princeton students that I've known over the years from a self-worth theory of achievement motivation, we always thinking about approach and avoidance motivation. So if somebody's doing something, we want to ask, what's the drive or need for why they are pursuing that? At the same time, we can ask, what are they avoiding? And behaviors or actions that do both at the same time are particularly powerful and habitual, right? Like
Right.
if it serves both of those motivation types of motivation, approach and avoidance, you can see how they're very powerful. They're doubly powerful. So so specifically, the claim is that many people in places like Princeton or Harvard are doubly motivated, over motivated. In fact, they are motivated they have a strong drive to achieve and a strong drive to avoid failure. And those point in the same direction. So that's doubly motivated, as you might say. Marty would say, Marty Covington, my mentor who did a lot of this work, would say, many people are primarily motivated to avoid failure, to protect and maintain their self-concept, and they do that by succeeding. So the purpose of succeeding is to avoid failing, not to triumph.
Right.
That makes sense?
Yep.
And there's not a pure distinction, but it's useful to think about that. And so procrastination is a way to, for instance, to modulate these two different kinds of motivations. I can avoid failing, at least the appearance of failing externally, because I didn't put in my best effort. So I didn't really fail, right? At least I didn't fail in a way that reflects accurately on my ability. I can always qualify that failure. Well, I stayed up late, I was sick, I didn't do this thing. So that kind of self-sabotaging or what I would reframe as self-protection is always there. So even if I don't achieve the external, so I'm meeting these two needs. I have a need to avoid the appearance or the meaning of failure, not just the failure, but the meaning of it. In fact, mostly the meaning of it. The meaning, what do I mean by meaning? The implications for my self-concept as capable, able, smart, genius, brilliant, STEM expert, whatever, because I equate that with my worth. So I got to protect that. Even if I don't achieve. And now if I achieve too, fantastic. So these are these two motivations pushing in the same direction, right? And so people are really motivated. Now, what if in the academic realm, your ability to achieve good grades is highly unpredictable, that you don't feel confident, you don't have a great sense of efficacy, you're not sure that you can get a good grade, maybe it's out of your control, or you work really hard but you don't get the result that you had hoped. That's what she says. I worked really hard but I didn't get the grade, and that crushed my soul. This is very common. Princeton students, Berkeley students say this all the time. What's most demoralizing coming out of high school is they worked hard, and I had this experience, worked harder than I ever had before and got worse grades. Okay, that's not unusual. That happened. I don't know about you. That happened to me. It happens to many students. The question is why? I think it's, is it students go, oh, it's me. I'm not as smart as I thought I was. Okay, but you have this experience a few times and you realize, wow, I could work really hard and not get the result, the affirmation that I wanted. Some of that is because I don't know what my professors expect. And I think that's not unfair. Actually, a lot of times students don't have a good understanding of what their professor standards and criteria and expectations are. And some of that's on the faculty, actually, not being very clear, transparent, or explicit. Then there's a question, could I even meet that? Could I ever be an A student at Harvard? Ooh. Even if I could, will I? Will I put in the effort? Will I do it? Will I perform? These different levels of kind of uncertainty, question. Am I capable? Doubt. I think these things are operating. So the very act of studying and preparing and going to tutoring and going to office hours and throwing yourself into trying to achieve and learn are inherently threatening. Because number one, well, even before it's threatening, they're anxiety provoking because they're motivated by uncertainty, right? Your anxiety is about, you don't know what's going to happen. I could work really hard and still not get a good grade.
And we should probably qualify that good grade, because she might have gotten a 95.
Right.
or whatever. I don't know. I mean, and then somehow she knows that X number of students got something above that,
That's right.
and they were somehow um, more distinguished than she
Yeah.
was. Yeah,
Yeah, well, the chances are she got an A because most
yeah,
students at Harvard are getting A's. But so this brings to me something. I'll take a slight detour and say, so for me, failure is not an objective. It's an
right,
experience. It's an experience. Failure means failing to attain my desired or expected outcome,
right,
not failure that's recognizable on even on your GPA. So I've had students say A+ is the only acceptable grade. Whoa, that's a lot of pressure.
right.
There aren't many. Some professors on principle don't give them. Actually, you may not even be able to get it.
And can I ask you a question about that,
Mhm.
or do you want to kind of go to your point?
No,
I
go
just
for it.
want
Yeah.
because there's what I need now,
Mhm.
like for my self-worth. Like I need to be achieving now, but there's also mixed in there is the sense of, well, if I don't get an A+, then I'm not getting that internship or that
Mhm.
job or
That's
getting
right.
into grad school as well, right? So do you find it's more one or the other, or is it just kind of mixed together? Um,
That's a good question. I think the main point I'd make about that is first, yes, there are material consequences as well as consequences to your self-concept and self-worth.
right,
So I'm not saying there aren't material consequences. What I'm saying, but I would say is that most people focus solely on the material consequences.
right,
And that doesn't, first of all, if you really look at the magnitude of the response, it doesn't really make sense. Why would getting not the best grade be soul crushing? And she doesn't say it if it's going to harm my med school applications. She says it's soul crushing. Again, I laud her for the language and vulnerability. She
right.
didn't say, "Oh, you just screwed up my application to Harvard Med School." She didn't say that. She says, and I don't want to over interpret, but she did say it's soul crushing.
Yeah, and I would even say, well, I just want to make a point, like even those projected material consequences aren't
That's
like,
right.
I think you're getting this point. They are part of your self-worth. They're not distinguishable from what I need right now. It's all wrapped up into one sense of myself. Like everything's in jeopardy
Yeah.
because of that.
Yeah. Let me make that concrete. So, for instance, the material consequence of getting a prestigious internship, getting into a prestigious grad school or professional school, moving on to a high status specialty in medicine or a firm in law. So those are usually what people say. That's what students say are the things that the material consequences. They don't say, I'm not going to be a very good lawyer because I don't understand this concept, or I'm going to be, I'll be a less than optimal doctor because I didn't understand this concept in organic chemistry, right? They could say that is a material consequence, right? I'm not as good a doctor or
Mhm.
lawyer. They're not, they typically don't say that.
Right.
They're talking about these other material consequences, which are about prestige, relative
Yep.
status, how I'm
Yep.
perceived, right? So this confirms that it is woven together. And again, I'm also not saying people shouldn't concern themselves with securing themselves financially and otherwise. Of course, and uplifting their families and uh, positioning themselves in their communities to help. Those are all very important and significant objectives and goals. The challenge is to hold those in ways that your self-worth doesn't come to master those or overwhelm those. And it's not easy for an 18 and 19 and 20-year-old. So there are real stakes materially. There are real stakes for your self-concept and self-worth, but it's the latter that are not usually talked about.
Right.
And if they're not talked about and understood, then it's hard to untangle them and then intervene in ways. And so what you see, for instance, is when students don't realize that they're doing a lot of these things in part because of misplaced understanding from high school, or because their identity is wrapped up into this, they don't realize that they're actually making choices that lead to the distress that they experience. So I mean, I don't know how many extracurriculars or how much time she's putting into it, but but I've certainly seen it in other places. Students are making commitments to things non-academic that make it virtually impossible for them to meet their academic goals at Princeton. There's not enough time and energy. Not possible. You can't do all those things and then put in 12 or 15 hours a week on each class and then perform and sleep and have friends and have some fun. They're just, and not, what a lot of students though is they take for granted, they take as a given these career focused extracurriculars. They're like, okay, I have to do that. Then let me see how much of the other stuff I can, academics, as little as possible to make that happen. And that's a gross overstatement. Students who want to be academics are really motivated intellectually, maybe don't have that. But there's a real dilemma. I would add that, again, students are saying they're involved in all these clubs and extracurriculars because it's for their career. But I know that there's an ethos, a culture at Princeton. I've heard students say it. Students will say, if you ask somebody, how you doing? And they're like, I'm doing great, I got plenty of time. They are skeptical of you. What do you mean? If you're not pushed to the limit, how important can you really be? You're not doing a bunch of different things on campus? Yeah, I don't know. Are you really driven? Are you really getting the most out of your Princeton education? Are you really that important? They'll tell me that. Well, you're telling me that they're not also internalizing that and acting themselves in this way. So, by the way, again, the tone maybe doesn't sound sympathetic. I am sympathetic to the students. They're reacting to this culture of a high achievement elite. So this is back to the first point. How do you demonstrate your eliteness? Well, you do a bunch of stuff at a high level and you make it look easy. Duck syndrome at Stanford, effortless perfection is what they call it at Princeton. At Penn, apparently they call it fronting. You put this front up, but behind the scenes, you're stressed and anxious and working hard. And again, these are human dynamics, right? These are ways to have other people affirm us and for us to protect our sense of self.
And we always get to this question of, they're in this cauldron of
good word
maladaptions and
stew. Yes, they are in the stew.
The stew, and you kind of want to just pull them out and just kind of help them realize, like, wow, look what you're doing to yourself. And so, like, again, this is why we emphasize self-awareness, because you have to somehow become aware of these dynamics. So which, like we said, initially gives you some distance, and with that distance, it kind of lowers the pressure and tension, albeit maybe for just a few moments. But in your experience, what has helped? I mean, how have students the students who do come to realize that, hey, this is nuts, this is not healthy, I want to, I although I want to achieve, I want to, the financial security, I want to have an impact in society, and but I don't want to go about it this way. Have there been some realizations or like that, those key moments that what are those that help students kind of break out of this?
Yeah, well, I think probably most students who make it on themselves. They figured out, or probably with conversations with peers. I'm going to give a shout out to my colleagues who are chaplains, because I think, and other people, to have these kinds of conversations and insights and reflections, you have to be talking to people who have a lens on what's going on, that would be capacious enough to talk about your deep passions and values and what's really at stake for you, and what are you trading off. And oftentimes it has to be really fundamental, because the other forces are so powerful, right? To push you to drive and to do these things and pursue affirmation and acceptance in this other way. So sometimes, I mean, one case that comes to mind is a woman. She said, I don't think I can be a good follower of my faith and be an effective Princeton student. And it's really causing me to distress. My faith is the most important thing to me, but it feels like my academics and my desire, the things attached to that, are preventing me. And then that's a real moral dilemma, right? That's, whoa, the stakes are high, right? I assume something like, I'm not going to get salvation if I'm not a good, right? Then how would I do that? But I feel these immediate pressures. So in that case, we worked with her to say, kind of reframe that. How could she she was being pummeled, driven by the immediate forces of the academic culture and career culture. How could she keep what she valued more importantly to guide her actions, which was her religious faith and her religious practices? Crucially, it wasn't that her faith was being challenged, it was that she felt that she couldn't engage in the practices that she wanted.
Right.
In any event, I've seen others where a lot of it has to do with paring down for a variety of reasons. My students figure out what do they really value and care about, and to some extent, that is just a purely a natural consequence of the transition from adolescence into adulthood through college. College kind of should narrow you down.
Hmm.
So some of the problems at Princeton actually, I think, arise from these are highly capable people. They could be the same person can be a doctor, lawyer, entrepreneur, engineer. It's kind of too many choices.
Right.
And then Princeton offers you every pathway to all those things. Sometimes having your choices circumscribed and making you prioritize is actually a good thing. Particularly if you have a hard time making that choice yourself. So it's not the FOMO, it's not fear of missing out necessarily. It's that you could do anything. And so it's a good problem to have, but it is a problem.
Right.
So that happens. Another thing I'm thinking of, there's another woman, student at Princeton, in this case, who was very vulnerable, and I admire her courage a great deal. And I've used this story with students. So when I work with students, number one is to try to unpack these dynamics, the developmental process, which almost nobody ever talks to them about, which is, yes, as a child and as a kid, you should be taking your cues from your parents and your coaches and your advisors, but as an adult, what the process of becoming an adult is to take that inside more to yourself. Identify your values, sort them out, act on them, chart a path, try to follow that. We don't want 9-year-olds saying, well, I think I'm going to, no, we want them to follow rules
Right.
and follow paths. Now, probably at 29, that will not lead to fulfillment. So at some point between there, you need to adjust. And I think college historically has been the place for that, or one of them, and thereafter. So number one, to try to normalize that, hey, this is what you're doing developmentally. One of the main things you're doing developmentally, try to be a little bit aware of it and conscious of it and seek that out and take time to reflect and identify. And if the not knowing is not a problem in itself, the not knowing will give you the impetus to try to understand. That's an okay thing. If you didn't examine, you probably wouldn't come to a deeper adult level kind of understanding of yourself and your goals. So that's one way. Another way is to point some of these things out. Is like, Princeton is or Harvard or Stanford, your alma mater, if I may. Not that I know much about it, but these are all you can eat buffets. There is so much on offer there. You could do anything. It's incredible, the resources they have. But when you go to all you can eat buffet, don't try to eat everything. You're going to get sick. Right? Oh, right. But we actually, just as an aside, one of the criteria by which we pick students to come to Princeton, I assume other places, is they use the resources available to them. They did everything they could in their context. Well, if that's why you were selected, and then you bring that to Princeton, that's not adaptive. That's trying to eat the whole all-you-can-eat buffet. No. We actually need you to narrow down, and especially the academic demands will simply require that, because the academics just are going to count for way more, much more of your energy and effort and time than they did in high school, almost certainly. So, you can say, I'm going to trade off my achievement and say, okay, I don't need to get the top grades. Very few people say that, but so that's another angle that I work with students on. And then a third is actually let me come back to this. I alluded to this woman who she won Rhodes Scholarship, I believe, or maybe it was a Marshall, very high rating scholarship. 99% sure it was a Rhodes. And then she took the opportunity when she was being interviewed about that on the homepage to tell a story. And she told the story of after her first semester, or midway through her first semester, she called home crying to her mother, saying, I'm not smart enough. I shouldn't be here. They made a mistake. Princeton's too hard. I can't do it. Wow. How do you go from that to the pinnacle? Seemingly, certainly in terms of performance. And then what did she do? How did she do it? Well, as it happens, once I found this out, I started looking and read other interviews, because she had won other awards at different points along the way. And if you look at it, it's a master class in intrinsic motivation and altruism. She became fascinated by a field, threw herself into it. Then she had a mission associated with that. She was studying classics and looking at women and gender through in that time, and she felt that had some important things to say about contemporary young women like herself. And so now she had this fascination, but also a reason then what to do with what she was learning. And so now her motivations are very, very different. They're not about achievement. They're not focused on grades. She has a very different source of motivation that in many ways, and the research shows this, if you're fascinated or you're in service of other people, you're kind of inoculated to these failures. You interpret them very differently, right? If you're trying to get good at something, a setback can be very helpful.
Yeah, kind of jump. What's interesting about that, and I was thinking about the whole time we were talking, was, and this will be, and I'm going to say controversial, but it will come across as probably pretty harsh, is that when you're focused on your own achievement and your need to stand out, you are focused on yourself, and you will do whatever it takes to protect yourself, but then also to stand out. And as we talked about, that can mean, hopefully, at least you're trying to do better than other people, but sometimes it means you're pushing other people down. And that's, I know that for a fact, because I know, like, my humor used to be very cutting to people, because I was chopping people down because I needed to. That was part of my need for recognition. And that, it means that I'm at the center. Like, I'm always using everything else for my achievement, even my academics, my extracurricular, it's all for my own gain. Whereas, like, and I think this plays out with the female student you were talking about. When she got fascinated by a subject, there is an inherent shift where you're of humility, like, because you are now in service of this larger ideal, be it to service others, whatever. And so then you don't have to be, and you don't want to be number one. You're like, and not that she was the saint, but there is this shift where you are really in service, and so you are trying to learn more about this and yielding yourself to that need. There's a famous article essay by a woman, Simone Weil. I don't know if you have read her much or know about her.
Well, I have from you. I mean, I've learned from you.
Okay.
We've had many of these conversations.
She was a really interesting woman.
Spell the last name, because people may not recognize your pronunciation.
Weil.
Yeah.
And it comes across the bay. She was French, grew up in a Jewish home, became a Christian through some mystical experience. Now, she was her own, like, kind of esoteric, particular Christian, sort of Christian. Anyway, but she was writing around the time of World War II. She was in service of the Allies, the French, and she ended up dying in England, but was a contemporary of Sartre and others, and she was much smarter than any of them. But she wrote this essay on the importance of school studies as a form of prayer, and it was. I
read that. You gave me that piece, and I read it.
Yeah, it's fascinating because she's talking about, like, 2 + 2 = 5 is a lot of you. Like, that's a lot of your personality right there. 2 + 2 = 4 is in a way, for her, is a way of humbling yourself to the a reality greater than yourself.
Yeah.
And I see that. I just, like, I referenced that in talking about the student. She became fascinated by a subject, gave herself to that, and so there's a slight shift in her being, in service of something greater than herself, and that radically changed how she approached her studies. Made life in the university still a struggle, no doubt, probably some tough times, late nights, but it was probably much more fulfilling of a journey than it was previously, obviously. Given how, so anyway, I just want that idea of a humility. That doesn't cause the change; it's a product of the change. But becoming fascinated with the subject led to this humility. So
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some, from a motivational point of view, there is some way that we can affect that change. It's not only receive the effects of the change. So, meaning we can consciously say, and I'll do this. There's another thing I do with students is, okay, that sometimes called the 5 whys. You want to do something, why, and you keep asking, and usually that gets down to some core value.
Hmm.
But it's often of another order, of another source. I want to be a doctor. Why? It's a good. I can. Why? What's that? What's another why? Well, I'm smart. I'm a good student, and I can, so I can go to med school, and I'm gonna have a good career, and I'll have wealth and security. Well, why? Well, I want to uplift my family. It's been why? Well, why? Well, actually, my sibling was saved by a doc. You're often getting down. Well, so what? Why does that matter? Well, I want to help other. I've seen somebody transform somebody else's life. I want to do the same thing. That is a different order of motivation.
right.
And that's often, so for instance, that's a kind of thing that cannot be depleted nor reduced by anybody else's behavior. It has a different quality. My desire to transform somebody else's life is not affected by what you do. Very little anyways, even less, certainly less than grades or attainment. And there's only one position at the, UPenn med school in blah, 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 oncology. But there's not only one person that can transform people's lives by providing health to their families. That's usually not a limited reward. Does that make sense? And remember, one of the first points we made is achievement contexts we evoke these contexts because there's fewer rewards than what people want. If you frame and construe the situation in such ways that the words are not limited, then could easily interrupt some of these dynamics and change them. And so, coming back to if that makes sense, come back to your point about the self being at the center of many of these dynamics, and that the attachment or the focus on self being a source of some obstacles, say, source of anxiety, they can get in the way of engagement for other reasons, right? To deeply learn. I like to look at common turns of phrase. So we'll often say, "Oh, I lost myself in my activity."
Right.
That's intrinsic motivation. I was fascinated by that. Wow. Okay, that's a sign. Let's think you lost yourself. Yourself receded. Your experience rose up. We also say, do something in a cause bigger than myself. This altruistic, bigger than me. So
Yep.
myself shrinks relative to and then these are healthy, powerful dynamics. So another way, from my language and just reflecting on my own experience, when I pursued my fascinations, that was crucial to my learning and success. When I wrote a paper in college about what I wanted to think about, I got a better grade than I wrote a paper what I thought the professor wanted to read.
Right.
This is a concrete example. Did I work harder? Did I stay up later? Yeah. Do I remember those papers? Yeah. I see a bunch of consequences that the research confirms. Intrinsic motivation leads you to engage in different ways. You have different kind of experience, and qualitatively different kind of outcomes. And most of those are good, positive. Right. People would say that for their own experience, and also even for mostly achievement and material. Not always, but a lot of times. The second thing
can I just? Yeah. There is a danger though, because we don't want people to be like, oh, if I'm more intrinsically motivated and do that, then I'll get better grades, because that might not be the case. You took a risk.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. It could have come back where the professor said, this is not what I assigned, and C minus, but you still have been like, oh, that's stunk, but wow, I really enjoyed writing that. I mean, so yeah.
You don't want to become untethered to your context and your situation. Right. And there's some, I mean, I am definitely encourage people to be strategic, but you are right on that. So we do live in a world, and people have power, and there are grades, and those things happen. My sense is students don't usually need to be reminded of that. What they need to be reminded of is.
Oh, no, I think my point was more, I just don't want students to say, oh, if I'm intrinsically motivated, then they're using intrinsic motivation to somehow manipulate whatever they're trying to achieve for that extrinsic reward. I think that's the danger. I mean, yeah, sometimes it does work out that way, but part of me is like, then you've lost the intrinsic motivation.
Well, it's an interesting question.
Right.
So I think from my point of view that these things can coexist. It's complicated. I won't get into it today.
Totally. No,
But
it can coexist. I think you have to let go, or at least, um, you know, I think you have to let go of the external motivations to a certain degree, or at least be willing, open-handed about them
yeah,
if you're pursuing them with your intrinsic motivation. But that could be a different separate
yeah,
discussion.
it's a big debate in the field. So
Right.
that extrinsic motivations kind of always overwhelm intrinsic motivations. So if you know Alfie Kohn, KOH-N, he wrote a book called Punished by Rewards. His position is basically that somebody actually just wrote, what's his name? Eiler. He wrote a book Josh Eiler, I think he said is his name. He's basically saying grades are the problem. You cannot have the kind of intrinsic motivation so long as we have these grading systems. That's oversimplification, and forgive me, Josh Eiler. Actually, I like his work, but something like that. So that is a position, the over justification effect, things like that. We're going to bracket that. I just want to finish the second thought. So my experience working with students is there's these two kinds of motivation. One is intrinsic, which we just talked about, fascination. Others are enjoyment, self-growth, improvement, the sense of accomplishment or fulfillment that comes from challenge. These are intrinsic to the task. Then there's another kind of motivation, which is was sometimes called, especially by these two important researchers called DC and Ryan, called internal or internalized motivations. They're different than extrinsic or intrinsic. What makes an internal or internalized motivation? Is it something connected to a value, a principle, an ideal, an aspiration? These are to the core of you as a human being, in terms of, and they're often altruistic. So I use the word mission or passion. My fascination is what I'd call this intrinsic motivation, especially motivation to learn, to understand, is one, and that's a powerful and will lead to deep engagement and mastery and the desire to keep questioning and growing and learning because you want to really understand something. You have a fascination for it. And then the passion is to serve. Well, for what purpose? Who am I going to help? How? What social contribution am I going to make? Passion, mission, something like that. And when these things come together and they can coexist, people are super motivated. And you'll see that if you listen to the stories of people who have achieved a lot, they often talk in both of these dimensions, right? They really wanted to understand something, and they wanted to think about how would this make a positive contribution to a cause, a challenge, something bigger than themselves. And that's reflected in the story I told about the woman who won the Rhodes Scholar, right? She wanted to understand this, but when she also saw its application to an issue, a set of issues that mattered to her, and a cause that she cared about, then these things were kind of multiplicative. It was fascination times passion equals boom. At least often, I don't think she was pursuing a Rhodes Scholarship. I think that ensued from the combination of these two kinds of motivations. Any case, so I think, and just to remember the thread here, you're saying, how do we address this with people? I think we probably, as educators, we need to address students' concerns for achievement. What we often want to do is educate them about how people achieve great things. I think there's a basic assumption that the best way to achieve great things is to take the most direct path. Eyes on the prize, eyes on the prize, eyes on the prize. Students have been told that. And I don't think that often is not the case.
Right.
That's often not the path. Success often ensues. Achievement ensues.
Yeah, I think I think it's so easy. And I see this in, like, I talked about this in my church, like the church and Christian circles I run in. It's so easy as humans to focus on achievement, the externals, like those are the measures. So eyes on the prize, and not really, you don't really understand how reductive that is, and because you're looking at humans as these like robots, achievement robots, versus like this soul that's struggling with their self-worth and who am I. And you're feeding into this, we always use the word maladaptation, but like this way of being that is really harmful to students. So your point's well taken.
To their humanity and your humanity.
Exactly.
Right? So you kind of, you like you said, you turn them into robots. So that's the philosophical dimension, and as we often do that. And then the psychological dimension
Right.
is what's my job is to say, when you instrumentalize your organic chemistry class or this paper or that project, you're saying it's a means to an end. It's simply a stepping stone to the next thing. You actually put less in. You often feel more anxiety, and you get a lot less out of it. Yep. Psychologically. So the kind of motivation you bring to an activity, I just read, I'm not sure I believe quite this, but an important book said it determines your engagement processes and outcomes. I would say it powerfully influences, but in any event, but if you turn this thing into a step, not an experience or an act or a process of growth, then it's a step because you turned it into a step.
Yeah. And the sad thing is that when you forget, as we often do, people's inner beings, and we focus on their achievements and thoughts and whatnot, all the things we can externally measure. And again, it's not to say we have to jettison those, like grades or something like that. Those can serve a really important role, as you've discussed in your book. But what kind of people are we shaping and molding here? That really, in addition to them, it's like, well, how are the rest of us affected? Because we've had colleagues or supervisors who are so wrapped up in their own needs that they create an unhealthy work environment. They're unpleasant to work with, and you can't collaborate and really achieve great things. And that's because they are so self-absorbed and so focused on protecting themselves.
Yeah.
And are we fostering that with these students
Right.
who are in this achievement context, versus helping them become aware? That's where I always come back to the idea of humility. I just feel like that when you're serving something greater than yourself, it doesn't mean you're a saint and the best person in the world, but you're more inclined to perhaps be a bit, have, I guess, better. You're not so I can't remember the word. I used to use this, that you're so you're so self-centered, and everyone's just, everyone's like a prop on the stage for your own.
Mm-hmm. You kind of objectify. So you're saying?
Objectify people. Yeah, sorry. There's this word I'm reaching for, which as soon as we stop recording, it's going to come to mind, of course. But anyway, I feel like once you become internally motivated and intrinsically motivated, you perhaps are more inclined to see other people in their humanity as well. That's so right. Versus objectifying them.
Yeah. So I think we're kind of winding down. A quote or a near quote comes to mind, so that I'll make my last contribution there. It's from my mentor, Marty Covey. Did a lot of this research. And so when you talked about, the role of educators, for instance, right? One thing, I'm pretty sure he said this almost verbatim, but if not, I distilled it from his much wisdom, which is something like, as educators, let's appeal to students' most noble values. They might just surprise us,
right,
and themselves.
Right. That's a good point. I like that.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, should we call it there? I think that's a great discussion. I love this topic. I mean, it's it's something you and I have struggled with for so long. When we were both at the university, and still to this day. So thanks, Nic, for suggesting this as a topic.
Thank you, Matt. I enjoyed delving into this. I learned some things, as always.
Is there any last thoughts, though, just before we call it? Or was that quote?
We'll give Marty the last word there.
Excellent. Love it. All right. Until next time. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt.